Greetings, Cap fans, and welcome to episode 108 of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Verbanis, and as always, I'm joined, some would say, I don't know how many, but some would say,
A handful.
Yeah. Uh, the best gosh darn co-host out there, that would be Bob Lucius. Oh, Bob, Confucius say, virginity like bubble, one prick, all gone.
Oh, Rick, I didn't know you were a philosopher
I am at heart.
at heart. Okay.
I am at heart, Bob. But yeah, Confucius, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, of
he has,
course. Yeah.
yeah, great philosopher
Uh-huh.
of the last century or two. I don't know. When was
Right.
he around? I have no idea.
Yeah. Back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Before the interwebs.
there have been made jokes about things like Confucius say, right?
Right. Yeah.
But I thought that was appropriate because we are going to wax poetic and philosophical discussion today,
Mhm.
because we have on guest Professor Dr. Mark D. White, author of The Virtues of Captain America, to bring him back from, we had him back on episode 30 and we thought we'd bring him back. And one of the reasons we wanted to bring him back, because we were watching the She-Hulk Disney Plus series, and then on the first episode, I think it was, they had a end credit scene, and there's Jennifer Walters sitting with her cousin, and they're talking about whether or not Steve Rogers is a virgin. So, what better Confucius say than the one I gave?
Right. Yeah, everything comes together, Rick. It's like you got that board with all the what are the thumbtacks in it with the strings connecting things, and
Uh,
beautiful. Well done.
you don't want to see the inside of my mind. It is it is a dangerous. It is a dangerous thing.
Dangerous
Do you have any Confucius says
I
favorite jokes?
I don't. Yeah, no, none off the top of my head,
No.
unfortunately. Yeah.
Oh,
Put me on the spot. Yeah.
one of my favorites. I'm trying to remember now. Is what is it? Confucius say, "Man hurrying through airport turnstile is going to Bangkok."
That is my favorite right there. Only because I bet those airport turnstiles on the way to Bangkok. It's very accurate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, so yeah, we're going to be getting to our guest, Mark White, here in a little bit, and that's going to be a real fun conversation. Hey, Bob, we should, and we, we had a bunch of people, call in, write in, some messages on which questions we should ask, right?
Mhm.
We posted the question out there, like, what philosophical questions should we ask Mark White, our next guest? We posted it on our Captain America Comic Book Fans Facebook group. So if you haven't been on that Facebook group, it's a great group. I highly recommend just go on. Listen, if you're looking for something positive in your life, I mean, we know social media can be filled with, let's just say, not the most positive things, right? I mean, there's people with their soapboxes and they're talking about this and that and they're arguing and whatever. Not our group, Bob.
No, sir. Nope. Not in our group. Not allowed.
Yep.
Better things to do.
We have a no negativity rule, and we're pretty good about enforcing it.
Mhm.
Our group is only about, the fellow love of Captain America and the nostalgia that goes along with that. And so if you haven't been on there, highly recommend that you check that out.
Yeah. Yeah. Share what you love.
What's that?
I said, share what you love and respect what others love, right?
Exactly. Because otherwise, what would Cap do?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing. Oh, so what would Cap do? So we do have for those out there who've been listening, and you've been like, should I should I become one of those patrons that Rick and Bob talks about? I'm going to tell you right now, Bob. Guess what? You know that case of 100 what would Cap do challenge coins that we had made? I just opened up the very last package.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So if you've been hemming and hawing and you're like, I don't know, 4.99 a month, that's like a cost of a comic book. Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess the entertainment value I get from these guys is probably worth a comic book. Well, then get off your butt and sign up and be a patron and then after 3 months, we will send you a What Would Cap Do challenge coin along with a bunch of perks, including you have the opportunity to submit a question to our next guest. And Bob, guess who our next guest is going to be? Because this one is coming out November 2nd. You know, we always do the first Wednesday of every month, right? The first Wednesday of December. Should I tell them who the guest is going to
No,
be?
don't do it. Don't.
Okay, I won't, because that is something also as a perk from one of our guests, our patrons. You get to find out who our guest is going to be before anyone else. I would do a disservice to our patrons by doing that right now. So, but I will tell you, can I tell them kind of what the person does?
Maybe like throw a hint or something. Yeah.
This person
Writes
has,
comics.
huh? What'd you say?
This person writes or draws comics.
Okay, they're a writer. I'm going to just say that right now. It's a writer, involves with Captain America. Let you figure it out from there. And
So
some of
it's a process of elimination, right? So you just eliminate who's been on the show already, and there's probably what 3-4 left.
what do you have a guest in your room? What the hell is?
I do. My cat is in the room with me, and
This
now
is
he wants
really
out.
this is really professional.
Yeah.
Yeah. You couldn't have handled this beforehand, perhaps.
He calms me down, Rick. He's my therapy cat.
Oh God.
The stress of this show is sometimes more than I can bear. So
Oh, I see. You're like you're like Dr. Evil, right? You just walk
this
around with a cat in your hand,
this friggin'
petting.
show, Rick, stressing me out.
Toss me a bone. All right. Yeah, so check out the Facebook group. But if you want to become a patron, just go to CaptainAmericaComicBookFans.com. And then there's a little place on there where you can sign up and click a link and go to our anchor page and sign up. And listen, we really appreciate it. We're not getting rich off this show by any means. This is just covering our expenses. But I'm going to tell you right now, we made 100 challenge coins, and we're getting into the last batch.
That's incredible, Rick. And those things are beautiful, right? And I don't think we had any. I don't know. Maybe we'll get more. There's a different design or something at some point, but these things are one of a kind. Well, 100 of a kind.
I don't know, Bob. I'm kind of feeling like we're going to move on to something else.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think this should have been. This is a limited edition, 100. What do they say at the mint? 100 stamped or whatever they say. I don't know what they say. Struck.
What were those commercials? Remember when we were kids? It's the Franklin Mint.
There you go. Right. Yeah.
There's those. This is one of those plates that you. Do you ever go to somebody's house that has those plates hung up on the wall?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Display them on the wall.
Yeah. Usually there's wood paneling behind those plates, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The dark mahogany wood paneling. Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful veneer.
All right. Okay, so let's just, you know what? We've been keeping Professor White in the green room a little too long. I say we get to our guest. What do you think?
Yeah, let's get him before he eats all the snacks.
All right.
Rick, we have a really special guest tonight, right? I mean, how many return guests have we had?
I I don't know, Bob.
We
Maybe
have
two.
really two. Okay, well, certainly, I thought this might have been our only return guest.
Most don't want to come back.
Well, that's what I figured too. So it was a surprise to me when you were able to convince Dr. Mark White to return to the show tonight. Now, if our listeners remember from his previous meeting with us here on the Captain America Comic Book Fans podcast, he is a department chair for philosophy at the City University of New York's College of Staten Island, where he teaches courses about the intersections among economics, philosophy, and law. Now, many people who are, of course, come on to the Facebook group know Mark White is the author of several books, including the ever favorite The Virtues of Captain America, modern day lessons of character from a World War II superhero. In addition to a list of authored books, chapters, journal articles, and popular media articles and op-eds addressing a wide range of philosophical matters, Professor White has also been a frequent contributor and editor in the Blackwell Philosophy and Pop Culture series, which introduces readers to basic philosophical concepts using the movies, TV shows, comic books, and music that they love. Now, Dr. White also publishes several blogs, such as The Comics Professor, his personal blog for comic commentaries, The Virtues of Captain America, his online companion blog for the book of the same title, and he publishes hundreds of blog posts covering every Tales of Suspense Captain America story, hundreds of Captain America issues, the entire first volume of The Invaders, the Avengers run from issue 4 up through 269, as well as Cap appearances in dozens of other titles along the way. So, if anybody, Rick, is qualified to talk about philosophy and Captain America and that intersection, it's Dr. Mark White. So, Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back, guys.
No, absolutely. We highly encourage our listeners to go check out episode 30 if you haven't already, or go listen to it again, as it was a year and a half ago, and you probably need a refresher. In that episode, we talk a lot about your book, The Virtues of Captain America, and we talk about several topics. But today we thought we would want to chat about some new ones. So, but before we do, I have to ask, is the rumor true? Are you working on a sequel?
Yeah, yes, the all the internet buzz is correct. I am I'm working on a revised and expanded second edition of The Virtues of Captain America. It was really just a whim. I was talking with my editor at Wiley about something else, and I just remembered that the original book came out in 2014, in time for the Winter Soldier. And I realized, now it's 8 years on. It'll be 10 years in 2024. And I just mentioned to him, I didn't think it would fly. I just said, hey, it's going to be 10 years for The Virtues of Captain America. And lots happened in the last 10 years for the character in the comics, if not also the movies. It would be nice to do a revised second edition. And these kind of pitches usually don't work because it's a very, fiscally conservative press, and they don't like taking chances on things. But I was surprised to hear that they were happy with the sales of the first book, and they said, well, there's a new movie coming out in 2024, isn't there? And I honestly hadn't thought about that, but I'm like, yeah, there's that too. I was just focused on the 10th anniversary of my own book. I wasn't even thinking of the next movie. But I said, oh yeah, that too, sure, yeah, that's what I meant. And he said, yeah, sure, that's great, get to work. I was like, wow, I really didn't think he'd go for it, but to his credit, he did. So yeah, I haven't really dug into it yet because I've got a couple more projects to finish before then. But I'm really looking forward to. I plan on going through the entire book and just improving things and adding new examples where they're relevant, from the last 10 years of stories, because so much has happened over the last 10 years. I think it was just near the end of the Remender run. I think he'd just come back from Dimension Z.
Hmm.
When I finished the book, I worked in a couple of those recent issues, and Jonathan Hickman was starting his Avengers runs, Avengers and New Avengers, working up to Time Runs Out and the whole Secret Wars reboot. And I didn't even get to talk in the book about Sam Wilson's turns as Captain America, which will be an entirely new chapter in this book. and of course the Secret Empire um, event,
Oh,
debacle,
I just
disaster, whatever we want to
I just
call it.
heard I heard so many listeners cringe.
Well, I mean, those are the two major developments
Hmm.
in the comics for Captain America since 2014 when the first book came out. So, Secret Empire, there'll probably be a section because most of that wasn't even really the Steve Rogers we know and love. But I'll talk about that and how it took him in a different direction, kind of explored this fascist alternative to Steve Rogers and how he came back. And so there'll be a few pages about that, but there's going to be a whole chapter devoted to Sam Wilson, both how he first became Captain America in the shadow of Steve Rogers when Steve Rogers was aged at the end of the Remender run. And then when he decided not to be Captain America again during Secret Empire, and then, of course, the recent development where he became Captain America once again alongside Steve Rogers in the United States of Captain America miniseries. So, and of course, he is going to be the star of the next movie. So it works well. I get to address, the first book was focused solely on Steve Rogers. I didn't even talk about Bucky's short time as Cap very much, well, much less John Walker or anyone else. But this time, I really want to explore how Sam Wilson dealt with kind of this taking on this mantle of Captain America, and you can't do that without comparing yourself to Steve Rogers. But he was still set on doing it in a different way, a much more positive way, a much more assertive way with respect to his concerns as Sam Wilson, as opposed to Steve Rogers as a more contemporary man, obviously as a black man. He looks at things differently and he looks at what Captain America means differently. And I think that's going to be a great contrast, not in terms of opposites, but just the different way of approaching what it means to be Captain America, as opposed to the way Steve Rogers did it for most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up so many good points. I mean, the last 10 years, when you really think about it, has been just so many different stories for you to explore. You touched on, some big ones, obviously with Sam Wilson and the Hydra Cap. I joke about the cringe, right? But when you were on last time, we talked about that actually pretty extensively.
Yeah.
That story run. But it's definitely worth exploring. It's definitely worth talking about. It talks about, what if, right? If you take,
Right.
the Steve Rogers that we know, and you brought up a really good point in the last time too, was, Steve Rogers' superpowers is his decision making, I think is what you said, right?
His
And then
judgment. Yeah.
yes, right. But if that is, corrupted, if you will, by a different upbringing, what will happen? And it's an interesting, debate, to have. So I think there's so many great things for you to talk about in this next book, and it sounds pretty exciting.
Yeah, yeah. I was, like I said, I was almost shocked that it worked. My just throwing pitches out there. I mean, I do this occasionally, and usually they just land with a thud, but this one didn't land. It took off, and
Well, hopefully your editor's not listening right now and hearing your secrets behind pitches.
no, I don't think there's anything bad about it. I'm sure he knew I was surprised because, like I said, authors, throw these ideas out with editors, and usually they very, common, with a lot of common sense say, well, that won't work for this reason, or the market's not going to support it for that reason. But I was happily surprised that he was satisfied with the sales of the book, especially around the time that movies were released. So
Mhm.
he saw the movie coming, and I actually wasn't thinking about that, like I said, but it all worked together, it all came together. So I'm very very excited to work on that, and that I'll be working on that for about the next year, alongside other things, and then
So I
it'll
mean,
come out a few months before the Captain America 4 movie.
Mark, you're sure he was listening? Because sometimes when I want something, I wait till my wife's on the phone talking to somebody else, and then I ask her the question when she's like saying yes to somebody else on the phone, just so I could say yeah. So he wasn't on the phone, or he actually said yes to this.
Yeah,
This is
Yeah,
so
because I was
exciting.
surprised. Because I mean, at first he sent me an email, said, "Well, let me look into it," and I'm like, "Okay, that'll be it." I'm never going to hear about it again. And
That's
just
what my
like
wife says.
I think the
Yeah.
next day he got back to me and said, "You know
Wow.
what? The sales actually look really good again around, especially around movies. So yeah, I think this is a good idea. Let's go with this."
Well,
Yeah.
I think we deserve a mention, Rick, because I think we probably sold 6 or 7 of those books just in the Captain America Facebook group.
Yeah, God knows there's a link, and there will be one in this podcast notes as well.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty exciting. I mean, there's so many different stories too that you can explore, and I know you go outside of just the Captain America stories, right? So you also look at the Avengers and things like that. Did you happen to read? Because we explored this a few episodes ago. Did you happen to read the story of where Steve Rogers was in She-Hulk from? I want to say it was 2014, and there was like 3 issues where this was at the end of the Remender run, and Steve's old, he's aged, and
Oh,
and he
right. When
gets
Charlie Soule was writing She-Hulk,
yes,
right?
and he gets
Yeah.
Jennifer to represent him in court. Such a fun story because
Hmm.
and it explored 2 versions of Steve, and neither were Captain America. It was the older, depowered Steve, and then it was the young pre-serum Steve, like, but only by a few weeks. And so it had like 2 versions of that character. And I don't know. If you had a chance to read that, I would love to get your feedback on it.
I did, but I haven't reread that in a long. I read it when it came out because that was a great run of She-Hulk, but I don't remember it that well. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
But that's definitely on the rereading list. I mean, I had, the first thing I did when I signed the contract for the book, and believe me, I made sure I signed the contract for the book, is, just put, just off the top of my head, make a list of all the things I had to reread. Like it's not rereading the first 50 years of Cap like I did for the first book, but this last 10 years is quite a packed 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
between both Steve and Sam. Because, not only was Sam in the several runs of Captain America, he was also in the Avengers for a while. He was with the Mighty Avengers before Secret Wars. And, between the two of them, there's an incredible amount of comics to read. But that's really the best part of doing these books, though. It's just getting to revisit these stories and think about them a different way, especially if I've read them already, like I've read all these already,
Hmm.
and go through them and really get to peel the onion and go deeper into the stories.
Hmm.
So when you read these as a professor of philosophy, do you take a look at some of them and say, how would this particular philosopher interpret this versus this particular philosopher, the way they would interpret? Do you ever consider that?
No, that's really not how I do it. I usually go through and just say, whatever he's doing here reminds me of this philosopher, or whatever this
Okay.
character says reminds me of something this philosopher will say, or reminds me of this debate or this argument. So, like the most common one to find in comic books is the trolley problem, where you've got the trolley with 5 passengers on it and it's about to crash, but you can divert the trolley, but it'll kill an innocent person on the other track.
Mhm.
And there's just so many superhero stories where the superhero can save a lot of people, but at the cost of some other disaster. And so, I'll just be reading a story and I'll say, okay, oh, this is another trolley problem, because it's such an obvious moral dilemma to put a superhero in. So, or I'll see, a dilemma with lying, or I'll see an instance where someone explicitly says, I'd love to go, I'd love to pursue a relationship with this person, but my duty as a superhero takes precedence, or I can't put this person into danger. And these are all very typical moral conflicts that we talk about in moral philosophy. So that's really the way I approach it. And sometimes some of those will invoke a conflict between two philosophers, but that would come later.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's always fun to think about, putting yourself in a different mindset like that. So it's interesting. And so before we get into philosophical questions, let's get a technical one out of the way. One of our members of the Captain America comic book fans Facebook group, Matthew Glover, he says an important part of academic scholarship is citing credible sources. And he says, my question is, when it comes to citing comic books as source materials, do you find it difficult to navigate all the numberings and renumberings as well as the different volumes? So let's talk about that. How difficult is it to cite references? For example, a lot of times when Bob and I are chatting about a subject, I'll recall Cap said or did a specific thing, but I can't exactly recall the exact issue. And do you have a great reference finder, or do you have some innate Rain Man ability? Like how do you remember this stuff?
Actually, no, I'm a horrible geek because when I go on podcasts like this one, I think even with my first appearance, I was blanking on the issue where Cap shoots the ultimatum agent. It was 322 or
Yes.
323,
Mm-hmm.
and but I blank on that stuff all the time. So like when I'm on a Thor podcast or a Cap podcast or a Batman podcast, and I'm always like, oh, there was that issue or that story where Batman fought that guy and said that thing and that thing happened. And I always think of the Simpsons episode with I think the writer of Radioactive Man appears at the comic book store, and all these fans show up, and they're saying, Radioactive Man has always been right-handed, but in issue 112, he signed a signature with his left hand. Was this an alternate version of Radioactive Man? And the writer's just like, who are these insane nuts?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have the memory for those details, which I realize a good comic book geek should have.
Uh-huh.
So I take lots of notes. I mean, when I'm actually doing one of these books, I take lots of notes. And of course, my blog now is a great resource as far as I've gotten in the blog up to 1993 now. But also the Marvel Wiki. It's not an official Marvel resource, but it's part of a whole set of wikis about different fandoms. There's a DC one
Mm-hmm.
and a Marvel one and a Buffy the one and a Breaking Bad one and everything. But this is an incredibly it's like the official Marvel Index, except it's not official. So it breaks down every story and who appears in it, and you can click on the character and see what they did next, what they did last. And so I'm always especially when I'm writing the blog posts, I'm always on that Marvel wiki, just checking things and double checking things and finding out where characters appeared before. So I use a lot of online resources for that. But also to the question of just citing things, I'm a citation geek. I'm the rare academic that loves formatting references at the end of a paper or a book. And when I've edited volumes, that's when I usually, when you edit a volume and you have people contributing chapters to it, most editors will force them to use the referencing system and get their citations all in order. I'm like, do whatever you want. I'll get them in order because I actually like doing that. It's a part of the process where I don't have to be necessarily creative or innovative. I can just, kind of get into the zone and do it. It's kind of like meditative
Yeah,
almost.
it's mindless, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I
Yeah.
love mindlessness. Forget mindfulness. I like mindlessness. So, no, I mean, the weird thing is, I mean, Matthew, right, was his name?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
He's exactly on point though when it comes to the renumberings, because when lately with all the going back to legacy numberings, and then the next volume launching with number one, and then it'll go back to legacy numbering at an anniversary issue or whatever. That's where I really differ with the way that most places like the Marvel Wiki do it. Is let's say, well, it was the Brubaker run after Fear Itself, when when Bucky quote unquote died again,
Mm-hmm.
and Steve Rogers took up the shield again, uh, and then I think they had a like a 60th anniversary issue and a 600 issue, and they had a bunch of anniversary
Right.
issues, and then they went back to the legacy numbering. And I remember Brubaker's run, I think, was volume 5, and some of the databases, when it went back to legacy numbering 600 or 600 whatever, they would bounce it back to volume 1. But that just
Mm-hmm.
messes with my head because I don't care where numbers go. I want volume numbers to keep progressing. So when I if you look at the references in my book, I always, when it returns to legacy numbering, I maintain the same volume number. Because otherwise, I mean, especially the way I order my references is Captain America volume this, number this. And if I kick it back to volume 1 when it goes back to legacy numbering, then I have to reorder those, and I like those to be in chronological order. So that's, like I said, I'm a referencing geek, so I take this stuff very seriously. And usually at the end of my books, I know I did this with the Captain America book, I have a reading guide mainly to help new readers understand all the different volumes of the book and the way the numbering changed and everything. And I try to explain this to perhaps people that read my book. Maybe they read some of the comics and now they want to go back and read more of them and read more extensively, just so they can make sense of, when someone says Captain America number 19, that wasn't the first volume, because the first volume started with 100. It's got to be volume 2 or 3, or some of them may not have made it to 19, or some, it's so confusing. And when I did my recent Thor book, that was perhaps even more confusing, because recently, every time a new volume of Thor is launched, the title has been different. It's usually Captain America every time, except for Sam's title, I think, was all new Captain America. Or they have Steve Rogers Captain America and Sam Wilson Captain America. And of course, now they have Symbol of Truth and Sentinel of Liberty. But with Thor, it seems that every time they relaunch Thor, it either be Thor, Thor God of Thunder, Mighty Thor, Thor's back, it just, and then every once in a while they'd go back and use an old name. So then it'd be volume 2 of that name, but it would come after 3 volumes of a different name. Oh gosh, it's just, and I love trying to make sense of this and saying, how would I try to make sense of this to a new reader, or maybe a reader that just got completely confused by it. And it helps me keep track of it too. So when I'm, writing the book, it helps for me to keep it all straight. It is so confusing. I mean, it's DC does this much less, but Marvel just loves to relaunch books with new number ones.
Yeah, you're talking to a former comic shop owner, so for me to put the trade paperbacks, I would do them in chronological order so that people could start here, end up there, but the volumes don't always match up, and so I hear you. We had current Captain America editor Alana Smith on the show, and we asked her about this. We asked her about numbering and everything like that. And I do love that marvelfandom.com. I use that a lot.
That's it.
Yeah. I use that a lot for the podcast. I use it a lot for the Facebook group, for my posts and things. And I asked her about that. I said, what about, what is Symbol of Truth and Sentinel of Liberty? Are they considered volume 11, considered blah, blah? And she goes, Marvel doesn't look at the numbers. We don't do that, because there came a point, like you said, Mark, that somewhere along the line, maybe it was that Brubaker run where it was, legacy numbering, blah, blah. And she goes, we as Marvel, we just refer to it as Captain America 2022.
Yeah. 1968.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's what they do. So,
but see, that here's why I don't do that though. And I know some other people. I have a friend who just wrote a fantastic book about the science of Daredevil, explaining how his senses work and everything. And when she references books, she uses those dates. And I mean, she does a fantastic job, very detailed, very accurate. But I just really, it bothers me when I see Daredevil number 312 and then see 1963 in parentheses. I say, well, the volume started in 1963, but this book was probably in the 90s. And when I think about, I'm trying to think in my head when this issue happened, and the 1963 just kind of messes with the way I think about that. It may make perfect sense to other people, but it just, for me, I'd rather have the volume number and then include either the year or the month of the year of the actual publication, so I can make sense. Because if I'm talking about the 50, 60 year history of a character, and I just cite a book, I also want to mention about when that happened, so the reader can kind of place this. Was it early Cap? Was it late Cap? Whatever. That's just my preference, but that's why I do it. Like I said, I'm a geek about these things. I take this very seriously.
So you do have a little Rain Man in you. I can sense
a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
A little bit.
It's funny when you were talking about that Simpsons episode. It totally reminded me of a 1980s Saturday Night Live. William Shatner was the guest host, and he goes on and he's talking at a Star Trek convention, and he's up on the stage, and people are peppering him with questions. In episode 14, when so and so did this, and he's getting all those similar questions,
Yeah.
right? And he kind of just goes, people, get a life.
Yeah.
And the promoter has to come up and like whisper in his ear and oh, sorry, that was the evil Spock from episode such and such. And all the fans are like, oh, okay.
All right.
Yeah. Bob, time to get philosophical.
All right, yeah, let's dig in a bit, shall we, Mark? So, the first thing I want to ask you, and you touched on this briefly a little bit ago, this idea of Captain America as a mantle, right? It's an important role, a set of responsibilities that can be passed from one person to another. So, I mean, it was obviously passed from Rogers to Naslin to Mace, and then eventually to Burnside. Of course, all retcons, and then back to Rogers, right? And then who either surrendered it or had it taken away on multiple occasions. It was passed to Walker, Barnes, and Wilson. And in different universes, such as we see in the Captain America Corps miniseries, we see that mantle is borne by others at different times in other places. So it does seem to be a mantle that can be taken up and taken off. But some argue quite passionately there is only one true Cap. So, which is it? Is it one or the other, or paradoxically both?
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say it's paradoxically both. It's kind of like how light is a particle and a wave at the same time. Because obviously Steve Rogers established who Captain America is. And, no matter who is Captain America, either alongside Steve Rogers or replacing Steve Rogers, it'll always be to some extent in the shadow of Steve Rogers. And we saw this with Bucky struggling to be Captain America after Steve Rogers, quote unquote, died. And, Sam doing it the first time after Steve was aged. And now Sam has accepted more his unique identity as Captain America. But still, the readers get to enjoy the contrast between how the two men fill the role. And, so I think I like to think of it in terms of something that Steve Rogers often says, is that anybody can be Captain America if they believe in the dream and they believe in the principles and the ideals. And I imagine we talked about this in the first my first appearance here, the Captain America: The Chosen miniseries, and how he kind of uses the last essence of his life force to kind of enable anybody to become Captain America. And you see people from all walks of life and all ages and races and genders, and becoming a hero in their own right, even if they don't have the shield and the cowl. Yeah. So it's this idea that's why I think it's both. And, I think that anybody can be Captain America, but at the same time, they'll all be doing it in the shadow of Steve Rogers. Mm. Even though Steve Rogers himself would say, "No, you're great." All those new characters that were introduced in the United States of Captain America miniseries. Steve just automatically accepted each of them. He didn't say, "Hey, what are you doing?" and acting like me or anything. He said, "Hey, welcome to the club. This is great. The more people that serve the dream like I do." I don't even think he considered it as they're imitating me or you're trying to be me. You're trying to be Captain America. I'm also Captain America. Welcome to the club. Thank you for joining the cause. And, even though he's willing to expand membership to anybody, at the same time, everybody is going to acknowledge that he's kind of the first. And like you said, if there can only be one, it would be him. But he's the last person that would say there can only be one. And, he readily gave it up to Sam when he aged. And he obviously welcomed Sam back in the same miniseries. And I'm sure he'd welcome Bucky back if Bucky wanted to do it again permanently instead of just doing it for that one-off appearance. But Bucky was never comfortable with it anyway, which is also a nice contrast because for some reason I didn't talk about Bucky very much at all in the first book. So as long as I'm going to be talking about Sam at length in this book, in the revision, the second edition, I think I'm also going to put in a little more about Bucky. Because I think with the first book, I was really trying to focus on Steve. And since the only legitimate successor was Bucky for that very short time, it didn't seem necessary to put him in. But now if I'm going to talk about Sam at length, I think I'm going to also put a little bit about Bucky in there.
I think a lot of fans would like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because his arc of being Captain America was one of, him trying to atone for himself. But as you said, he was, living in a huge shadow of Steve Rogers, and
Right.
that was a difficult thing for him to do. So, all right, so let's get back to that though. So what I'm trying to hear is, because as you said, right, Marvel has two ongoing Captain America series, right? There's two characters carrying that mantle at the same time, right? Steve Rogers and Sam Wilson. Can there be two Captain Americas at the same time?
Apparently so, because I mean, there's two Spider-Men, there's two Hawkeyes, there's, and certainly in DC, there's any number of Flashes, Green Lanterns, and even two Batmen going in, two Supermen. I mean, I think part of it is kind of going outside of story and taking a more meta approach to it. It's the fact that it's very hard to launch new characters these days, so it's easier for the comic book companies to just kind of branch off characters. They used to be, you'd have Spider-Man and Spider-Woman and Spider-Girl and Spider-Ham, and but now
Right.
you actually just have different versions of one core character. You don't even have, they're not even spin-off characters anymore. It's just, another character with the same name. And that allows them to take this core concept and kind of, test it out with, people, again, of different races or genders or backgrounds or ethnicities or ages or in different universes. And I mean, can there be two Captain Americas? I mean, it kind of goes back to the first question. I don't know if this was a part of that first question or just a follow-up, but I mean, it's this kind of idea. If you consider Steve Rogers to be the one and only, then obviously you're not going to accept anybody as a successor or as a parallel companion Captain America, I guess. Alongside like Sam and Steve are now. I personally don't have a problem with it, and I don't see, because there's definitely plenty of Marks. There's plenty of Mark Whites. There's even plenty of Mark D. Whites out there. Even just in academia, I find other Mark D. Whites publishing in chemistry or physics, or and I don't think anyone's going to confuse them. It's not like, for a while, Barry Allen and Wally West were both the Flash in basically the same outfit. People could definitely confuse them, but I think it'd be more interesting to consider what people in the Marvel universe think of this. Think of them being, several Spider-Men, several Captains America, several, Hawkeyes, etc. That's something every once in a while someone will make jokes about it, like, how many of you people are there going to be?
Mm-hmm.
But to have, kind of like, it'd be nice to see a return to kind of the approach that the Marvels miniseries by Kurt Busiek and Alex Ross took, which is really the person on the streets view of these people flying around and fighting in the streets, and how does this affect the average the average person in the Marvel universe, to see what they think of there being, in my day there was just one Captain America and there's just one Spider-Man, and now there's just so many, and but again, they're all saving lives. You should be happy about that,
I totally agree. And there's, if you want to get into a debate on it, just go to our Facebook group. There's plenty of thoughts on the subject. Yeah. All right, so let's get to another topic. We actually had somebody call in and leave a message.
This is Capaman from the Facebook group. I read your Virtues of Captain America blog religiously, and your appearance on the previous episode is what led me to the podcast. Not long ago, you reviewed Captain America 401, which sums up how the Cap of 64 to 95 would react to superheroes believing it's their right to be judge, jury, and executioner. But in recent decades, modern Cap has at times used unnecessary lethal force and accepted the use of unnecessary lethal force and torture by others. He's also condoned others using lethal force to spare him from doing so. In your book, you wrote that modern Cap's ethics are more appropriate because now one person has the potential to do much more harm than entire armies. But I wonder, how is this different from many supervillains Cap fought in the 20th century? Also, acting as judge, jury, and executioner is illegal, violates human rights, and is immoral regardless of the capabilities of the executed. Do you feel these modern aspects are consistent with the character you've been blogging about so far, or is this modern Cap fundamentally an ethically different character?
That's a great question. And that's a question I addressed a little bit in my book. Uh, mainly around, I think it dates with, if the first time I noticed it, I think was the first issue of Brubaker's run. I think he and Black Widow, I'm probably not getting the details right. Like I said, I'm bad comics geek, but I think no, not Black Widow, Sharon Carter, were fighting terrorists on a train or something, and they were on top of the train, and he was, decking and kicking and hitting people with the shield, and there'd be guys falling off the train and obviously dying, and he didn't seem overly concerned about it.
Yeah, he actually
he
took his shield and tossed it at a helicopter and took the helicopter down with the shield.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
obviously killing someone.
right. So, I mean, that's the first time I really noticed that, oh, this is different. He's more, less careful, more cavalier about this. And then there was the one that really shocked me. The one that, I mean, really shocked me was in also Brubaker's Secret Avengers run, when they were trying to get information out of somebody, and this may be what the caller meant about torture. When he was, again, I think with Sharon and Black Widow, and he was, they're trying to threaten this guy to get information out of him, and he says, "Oh, you're Captain America, you won't do anything." And he says, "No, I won't, but I'm going to leave, and I don't know what my friends are going to do, but I'm not responsible for them." And he walks away, and of course the guy freaks out, and you know and so that, these were the instances where the caller mentions in my book. I explain, um really what I was trying to do in the book when I explained that was not necessarily justify it, because as a reader, I don't like that. I don't like that Cap does that. But I was trying to say how we can reconcile this change in behavior with his, basic moral code, and his acknowledgement that at times he has to compromise. Like when he shot the ultimatum agent in issue 322. He realized, split of the moment, he had no other alternative, no other option. He had to do it. And then he tortured himself for issues and issues after that. I tried to kind of reconcile his more modern cavalier behavior by saying he has to make moral compromises more often because the stakes have increased, because, people are more, the greater destructive power in the hands of a single person. The tools of terrorism, don't respect traditional rules of engagement and warfare. Many more civilians are at danger from just an average guy with a bomb. And, again, that wasn't justifying that to myself, because I don't like this aspect of the modern Captain America, but I was trying to say there's a way, if you take a broader view to his ethics and acknowledge the fact that he does accept, regretfully, having to make moral compromises on occasion, these modern developments in warfare have led him to make these compromises more often. And in ethics, we have this concept called threshold deontology that I talk about in the book quite a bit, which really was introduced into legal philosophy in the context of torture, because obviously, the standard of view is torture is wrong, and you don't do it no matter how much good it would do. But a philosopher named Michael S. Moore said, well, that's fine, but if you consider the number of people that are in danger, let's say, a terrorist has put a bomb somewhere, and you're trying to get the location out of a terrorist that you've captured, and if that bomb is going to kill 10 people, you probably won't torture him. If it's going to kill 100 people, you probably still won't torture him. But if it's going to kill 10,000, 100,000, a million, in other words, how high do the potential costs of sticking to your moral principles have to go before you decide that cost just makes it, foolish to stick to this principle? I talk about this in the context of Batman a lot, because obviously this is the way you think about Batman not killing the Joker. And the Joker keeps killing people over and over and over again, hundreds and thousands of people. And, Batman still refuses to kill him, even though he knows, and he would like to kill him, and he knows that killing him would prevent countless deaths, but he still can't bring himself to do it. And, People, and the idea is this isn't somebody that just occasionally kills somebody. This is someone who habitually and regularly and delightfully kills people and loves to do it and will certainly do it again. So, this is the idea. This is the idea we think about when we think about the fact that the stakes for Captain America may have gotten so large that he's accepted the fact that he can't be as careful as he used to be about not killing somebody, even though he doesn't intentionally do it. He may not regard it as worthwhile to be as careful about not doing it as he used to be. I mean, he used, back in, the caller referred to the comics that I'm discussing now, kind of the classic era of Cap on the blog.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that, after Cap defeats somebody, if they're about to fall over a cliff, he'll save them, even though he just fought them to stop them. And he may have beat them up very badly, but he doesn't want to kill them. So if he sees them falling off the cliff, he'll catch them. Okay, and he goes to extraordinary lengths, and usually the villain says, "Oh my gosh, Captain America's saving me," and I'm like, "Have you not read this guy's book before? Of course he does this,
Right.
So yeah. I mean, I'm again. I think I don't want to repeat myself, but I agree with the caller. This is a shift, and what I was trying to do in the book is kind of reconcile that shift with his use of judgment and his acknowledgement of having to make moral compromises. It's just he has to make them more often now. Do I like it? No, but I think that's a way we can understand this change without having to. Without having to say that he's a different moral character. I think it's just his sense of morality has evolved, definitely not for the better, but perhaps justified by changing circumstances.
Yeah, I think also too, and I think these are great things to consider. And I would agree with you also that he has changed. Yeah, but when it comes down to it, right? When we're talking about is Captain America a moral exemplar, right? We talked about that really in detail in the last time you were on the show. When it comes down to it, though, it's really about not the character. It's about the person writing the character.
Absolutely.
And so you had said in the last time you were on the show that, it kind of started with Stan Lee. I think you referenced the college issue where Cap goes there and he's with Gene Colan as the artist,
yeah.
and Cap goes and he starts to question. He's like, these kids need to go back to school. They're protesting, but then he's like, maybe they have a point. And then he goes on to say, maybe I should have been listening all along.
Right.
And you pointed to that as being like the first time where Cap starts to have this moral, ethical center of really giving, more thought. But that was Stan Lee. Stan Lee was the person with that message. And then you referenced your favorite writer and mine too, J.M. DeMatteis. He went on to write about Cap a certain way. In between, Steve Englehart had, he brought a lot for it. So it's really this character that we all love and we all trust that is in the hands of these writers, but ultimately probably the editors, right? Because I know we've had Jim Shooter on the show. He's going on to say, and that's why J.M. DeMatteis left Captain America. He and Jim Shooter got into an argument on how Captain America 300 was going to go and so on. And Jim said, the character is somebody who's entrusted. I feel like my job is like, I have these characters that they're entrusted to me and I have to stick to what I think is their core. Maybe that core is shifting, right? Because times change, editors change, and therefore writers have more leeway. Maybe that's really what we're seeing here.
Yeah, I mean, there's two ways to look at it. I usually try to look at these stuff from in story, a way to explain the changes in the universe. But there's also obviously, if you have something that's hard to explain in universe, you usually go back to the writers and editors and the creative teams in general to try to explain them. and say, it's kind of like when people say, why doesn't Batman kill the Joker? I talk about how, he can't compromise his moral integrity by taking a life and everything. And then people come back to me and will say, well, you can't kill the Joker because he's such a great villain and he sells books. I'm like, well, yeah, of course. I mean, both are right, but they're just different perspectives. One's in universe and one's out of universe. And I prefer to stick in universe, because it's a little more of a challenge. Like with the caller's question, how do you make sense of Cap's shifting behavior? I mean, if you just say, well, it's different writers, it's different editors, well, of course that's why. But if you trust that these writers and editors are trying to write a consistent character, how can you make sense of this changing behavior in the same sense of the character? And that's what I try to do.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It's a lot more fun that way, Mark.
Yeah.
let's stay within that. All right. Well, here's another, and this is a kind of I guess a more deep philosophical question. We have one of our listeners, Grant Ball. He's one of the patrons of the show. He asks, what does it mean for something to be true in regards to fiction? For example, it would feel untrue to say that Steve Rogers has red hair and green eyes. But since Steve Rogers is fictional, wouldn't that be just as true as saying he has blonde hair and blue eyes?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, it's a little out of my realm of expertise. I'm mainly a moral and legal philosopher, but I know there's a fascinating literature which I've only scratched the surface of, and I don't do it for my work, but just because it's interesting, about the philosophy of fictional characters. Like one topic is the ontology. Ontology is the study of existence, the nature of existence. What's the ontology of fictional characters? Does Batman does Captain America, does Sherlock Holmes, do these characters exist in a real sense? Aside from just, obviously they're the subject of books and comic books and movies and TV shows, etc. But these characters also affect people's lives. I mean, Captain America has definitely affected all of our lives, and other superheroes affect other people's lives, and other fictional characters, and you know, uh, you know, you can't have something affect you and not be real in some sense. They're not corporeal. They're not flesh and blood, but they're real in the same sense that an idea like justice is real, or love is real, or happiness is real. I mean, it's in the realm of what philosopher John Searle calls social reality. And social reality, like a dollar bill is just a piece of paper, but it has so much more meaning invested in it by the fact that it has this function as money. And that function is just purely social reality. If a dollar bill landed on another planet, they just think it's a piece of paper with green writing on it. So the fact that fictional characters don't exist in any corporeal or physical sense doesn't mean they're not real. And I think that, I'm trying to tie this back to your patron's question, and really saying whether what color hair and eyes Steve Rogers has, of course, is determined by the creative teams behind the comics, the writers and the artists and the colorists and the editors, and it's really what they've determined these properties to be. So when you say would it be true to say the Steve Rogers has red hair and green eyes? You're really more specifically asking, is Captain America portrayed in the comic books and movies as having, red hair or green eyes? And obviously he's not. So, I mean, when you're referencing a fictional character, you have to reference a certain iteration of them. Now, take James Bond. James Bond doesn't have any consistent hair color or eye color because he's been played by so many different actors. I don't know if in the books he does. I haven't read many of the books, or at least not for a long time. Okay. But, that character is more, I think, more flexible than Captain America or other most superheroes are. Bruce Wayne always has dark hair. I actually don't know. I think he's blue-eyed, but I actually couldn't tell you. Okay, and I've read as many Batman books as I have Captain America books. But yeah, Captain America is the typical, the picture of blonde hair, blue eyes, either the all-American ideal or the Aryan ideal, as Red Skull would call him. It's classic based on that. I think Natasha Romanova has always had green eyes. I wish these things were kept more consistent.
Sure.
But I mean, that's not the point of the patient's question. But I mean, it's a great question. But like I said, it's not an area of philosophy that I'm very well versed in. But I think it's a fascinating one because I deal with fictional characters so much. So when I see an article about this, I love to read it.
I'm gonna throw something out here. It's not something I planned to ask, but you got me thinking about something, and I'm wondering if either of you know the answer. Right? Why was Steve Rogers created as a blonde hair, blue eyed at a time when this Aryan model of perfection was, being held up as the Superman, right? And he was created by two, Jewish creators. Has anybody ever explored
That's
that?
a great question. I don't know. I don't remember reading about that. I mean, I've read about, why Tony Stark was created the way he was created and
Yeah.
why the Fantastic Four are in, but no, I mean, that's great because that would seem very relevant that they're almost playing into, maybe they were mocking the German ideal. They're saying to the Nazis, this is your perfect man. Well, now he's going to be the symbol of liberty and democracy. So take that. That may have been why, but that's pure speculation on my part.
No, but I think, I mean, if I had to guess, and it is strictly a guess, I agree with you, Mark. I think you're onto something there as far as, here are two Jewish people who saw the horrors of what was going on over in Europe, and knowing what was going to be coming our way. And this character was created as a someone to, a patriotic character, right? So someone who was going to represent America and ideals. You're right. I think maybe they were done, a blonde hair, blue eye, Aryan race to say, hey, listen, people of Germany who believe a certain way, you know what? Other people who look just like you believe the polar opposite.
Right.
Yeah. So it probably was something that was
more than just
determined.
aesthetics. Yeah, more than just the aesthetics of the character. Well, it looks like you've got some homework, Rick.
Okay, Bob. Thanks for always doing that to me.
All right. Well, I got another question for you, Mark. So we know that Steve Rogers from time to time has wielded Mjolnir in the comics, right? Thor's hammer.
Sure.
And of course, he famously wielded it in the MCU's Avengers Endgame film as well.
All right, Mark, before we get into Bob's question, I have to ask you, what was your reaction to that scene in the movie?
Oh my gosh, it was the same as everyone else's. My jaw dropped and I freaked out. It was so well filmed, and I love watching the reaction videos online of movie crowds watching that because it was just like that. I saw it on one of the opening nights, not necessarily the first night, but one of the obviously opening weekend, and packed theater, and everyone just erupted.
Yeah.
And it was so fantastic. Just this, the people talk about the shared experience of the cinema and everything. It was just, everyone knew what that meant. Obviously, most of the theater were fans, but they could have been fans of the movies or the comics or whatever, but everyone knew what that meant. And it was just collective celebration when that happened. And I was definitely part of that.
I still get chills.
Yeah.
When I especially when you watch it and you hear the audience react to it, I still get chills. I'll just tell you real quick my reaction. And I think me and my wife, my kids, we went on opening night, and as someone, and I have been saying to them for years, he can pick up the hammer, right? Because like I'm telling you, I read the comic and he's picked up the hammer. So there's that split second when he catches the hammer, right? And there's a split second. If you listen, of these clips online, you hear a pause and then you hear the crowd erupt. During that pause in my theater, you heard me go, yes! And then the crowd erupt. I was so excited. But anyway, I'm sorry. I just wanted to get your reaction.
No, I love that.
So anyway, Mark, I recently read an essay you published in Psychology Today, the online Psychology Today, about how to reclaim your sense of worth after losing it. I think it was the third issue in a series of three that you wrote about Thor, and I love those posts, by the way, and I found them personally useful. And then you talk about the need for autonomy and authenticity in being able to set one's path in life, and the importance of acknowledging one's own unworthiness in the pursuit of worthiness. So maybe another word is humility, having some humility. So how does Cap exemplify those and be worthy of lifting the hammer?
Well, I mean, those posts were based on my recent book, A Philosopher Reads Marvel Comics Thor, If They Be Worthy, and I'm glad you enjoyed them. And those were really the core of that book was based on the Jason Aaron's recent run on Thor. That was the basis for the last movie, where Thor loses the ability to lift the hammer, loses a sense of self-worth, and has to reclaim it at the same time that Jane Foster has picked up the hammer and become a Thor on her by her own right. And I mentioned in that book, I think it was Thor 390, when Steve Rogers as the captain lifts the hammer for the first time, and he's done it several times since. Um, I think he really exemplifies what Thor has to find out about autonomy and authenticity. Because if there's one thing that Steve's always been aware of, it's been his mission, his purpose. He's never had doubt about that. He's had doubt about how well it's working. He's had doubt about whether it's a value in a changing America, and against especially when political forces are against him and everything. But he's never doubted his purpose, or and more to the point, it's a purpose that he adopted on his own. He was given the super soldier serum and the Vita rays. He was given the shield and the costume, but he didn't say, okay, I'll do this, I guess. He obviously wanted to do this. He wanted to serve his country. He wanted to serve the ideals and stand up for liberty and democracy in the American way. And this is just a way that he was given to be able to do this. But he had always, long before he got the Project Rebirth treatment, he wanted to do this. So he was like I said, Immanuel Kant called it autonomy, choosing your own path in life and hopefully choosing the moral path. The existentialists called it authenticity, Jean Paul Sartre, talking about creating your own self, deciding who you are going to be, and then again, following that path. Those two concepts are very closely related. So I think just in the same sense of being worthy, Steve Rogers is almost worthy by definition. He is the standard that even Thor looks up to. And it also exemplifies those ideals of autonomy and authenticity, even when they're beaten down, like I said, by all these forces working against him.
Is Steve's occasional self-doubt? I mean, is that part of his worthiness?
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, I've done several podcasts about that Thor book, and I mention Steve Rogers, especially when I get to the end and where Thor realizes, like you said, that in order to be truly worthy, you have to recognize your unworth and constantly be struggling to become worthy. So it's like once you accept you're worthy, you're not worthy anymore. You have to always be trying to be better. And I say that's Steve Rogers. Because every time, there's so many times in the comics where Steve Rogers finishes a mission or beats the bad guy or saves the people, and he says, I could have done that faster. I could have done that quicker. That there's someone got hurt. I could have prevented that. The whole thing was shooting the ultimatum agent. I should have found a way to, I should have been faster. I should have found a different way to do it. And he's never satisfied with himself, even though he is obviously an amazing hero and he tries harder than anyone else. But he's never satisfied with his own performance. And all those Avengers issues, he's always in the gym working out. He's always trying to get a little faster, a little stronger, and he's never satisfied. And he may go a little too far in that. He may be too hard on himself. But the fact that he's never satisfied, if you ask him, are you worthy? He'd probably say, oh, no, but I'm working on it. And that is what makes him worthy. The fact that he has that humble approach to it. He doesn't have to say, no, I'm unworthy, but he says, yeah, I'm working on it. Maybe someday I'll be worthy. And that itself is what makes him worthy. And that's kind of the paradox of it that resembles some Eastern philosophical concepts. Like the Zen koans of the sound of one hand clapping and stuff like that. You're only worthy when you acknowledge you're not worthy, and by acknowledging you're not worthy and struggling to be worthy, that's what actually makes you worthy. And that's what Thor realizes at the end of this run of Thor comics. And when I get to that point when I'm discussing Thor, I say this is just like what Captain America does, and always trying to be better, even though most people will look at him and say, "Man, you're fine just the way you are." And Steve, "Oh, thanks, I appreciate that, but no, I'm going to keep trying to be better." And that's what makes him so awesome.
Do you think he has daddy issues? I mean, he's not, you know what I mean? Like he can't equal up to anything. Like he's always striving to be better. I said that kind of half joking, but I don't know.
If anything, it'd be his mother. I mean, his father was not an impressive man. His father was an alcoholic, and I think in but Remender's run, he was portrayed as hitting his wife, or being mean to her. Whatever, no matter how seriously we take that, he wasn't an exemplar himself. He wasn't like Pa Kent.
Sure.
He was, but his mother, I think it was something, he looks up to his mother more. And he looks up to his mother, supporting after his father died, supporting him as a single mother, obviously being sick and having to treat her and everything. I think she was more of an example to him, but I don't, I've it's certainly not in the comics. It's never been treated in depth that he's got, mother issues or parental issues or whatever. Which admittedly is a rarity for superheroes, because I mean Thor, the whole basis of Thor is having a father issue, not being able to satisfy this demanding father who embodies this demand of the hammer to prove his worthiness. And it is now in the current Thor comics, the spirit of Odin is actually in the hammer. So he's actually got his dead father talking to him through the hammer while he's using it. Say, "No, son, hit him that way. Shut up, Dad. I'll do it the way I want to do it."
I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah.
That actually sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
One last question. We had another patron of the show, Aaron Paul. He asks, he says, the relationship and interactions between Captain America and Cyclops, specifically Scott challenging Steve on his inaction with mutant rights. In your opinion, do you think Steve has done enough to advocate for mutant rights, or do you think Scott's claim of inaction is true? Has Cap not shown enough empathy to the mutant experience?
I can see where he's coming from. I mean, I can see where Scott's coming from, and I'm not a big Cyclops fan. I'm not a huge X-Men fan in general. I just never got into them like I got into the groups. Though I've liked the recent status of them that Jonathan Hickman set up with Krakoa and everything. But I really like it when they interact, because I almost think of Cap and Scott's relationship. If they worked on it more in the comics, it's kind of like Xavier and Magneto's, where Cap is almost like the Martin Luther King that's saying, why can't, the common version, the common understanding of Martin Luther King, where he's like, let's peacefully all try to get along. And and Magneto is more like Malcolm X, saying we have to take a more assertive approach to fighting for Black equality. And that's the way that people have typically interpreted Xavier and Magneto. But you can also apply that, I think, to Captain America and Cyclops, where Captain America's taking a more casual approach, saying if we just work together and try to calm down tensions, and we can come together and we don't have to use much force. And Scott, of course, is as he's come into conflict with Xavier over the years more recently, Scott is also taking the more assertive approach. But I think he does have a point. I mean, Cap's definitely reached out at times. When he's called to, he'll speak up for mutant rights, just like he'll speak up for women's rights, or he'll speak up for Black rights or gay rights. he always does the right thing when he's called on, but I think it's just like Sam Wilson criticizes him for. He's not forward enough. He's not assertive enough with actually taking action for these things. He's trying to be everything for everybody, and he's not doing enough for groups that need it more than other people do. So, I would say I would agree with Scott in that, but also I'd say that Cap is trying to be everything for everybody. And he probably acknowledges that he's not doing enough for any one particular person or any one particular cause, but he's trying to be everything for everybody.
Good point. And this is where I wish I had that innate encyclopedic knowledge of, citing materials, because I know this topic has come up, whether in DeMatteis's run and then in Grunwald's run, where Steve even questioned himself about he comes across a mutant and he's like, am I doing enough, for maybe it was it in the Cap versus Wolverine in annual number 8? It was is one of these stories, right, where he does question himself, because I think Wolverine, says something to him about anything, but
yeah, I do think it was that one. Yeah.
But great question by Aaron, and I love your response to that, Mark.
Yeah, well, I mean, also I think of the what was it, the Unity Squad and the Uncanny Avengers, also a Remender book, where Captain America puts together an Avengers team with Avengers and X-Men to try to get them to work together, and try to show the world that they can all work together. I mean, that was maybe a rare instance of him actually going above and beyond to do this.
That's a great example. I think it was Uncanny Avengers, right?
Yeah. I think then probably I think that was after the Avengers versus X-Men event, when you had a lot of great head-to-heads with Scott and Cap.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, let's end this with a fun question. Well, no, we don't need to get into serious answers here, but because one of the things that kind of inspired us to reach out to you, Mark, was we were watching the She-Hulk Disney Plus series, and at the end of the first episode, at the end credits, there's Smart Hulk sitting there with Jen Walters at his little bar on the beach, and they're talking about, is Steve Rogers a virgin, and they have their own debate. Now that's MCU, right? That's MCU. We love to talk more about the comics here, and quite frankly, it doesn't matter. The answer to this question, it doesn't matter whether he's a virgin or not. Who cares, right? But it's fun to talk about, because people lost their minds.
Yeah.
People are like, are you kidding me? Captain America, he has moral and ethics. He would never do that. He wasn't married. And then other people are like, are you kidding me? Captain America's got the super soldier serum going through his blood. Of course he is, whatever, and I know you've talked about Matt Murdock before. We all know he's a bit of a dog, but
we saw that in the She-Hulk series too.
that's true. But I don't know. It's a fun question to ask. Is there a comic book out there? Is there anything that we can cite or relate to and say, I don't know, yes, I don't know, maybe, I don't know, no?
I mean, in World War II, before he went in the ice, I don't remember any case of him getting close enough to a woman. I mean, he interacted with Peggy Carter when he was in France, and she was with the French Resistance, and that's mainly where their background as being in love came from.
Mademoiselle.
Right? Mademoiselle.
He didn't even know her name.
Yeah. And then there's the Adventures of Captain America miniseries that went back and explored his early days. And there was a Lieutenant, I just did this a few months ago in the blog, I think Lieutenant Cynthia Glass, that they were attracted to each other, but then she was exposed as a Nazi spy. That may have turned him off anything like that for a while. But, I mean, it's I don't think it would necessarily be a sense of morals, though, in the 1940s, premarital sex was much more frowned upon than it is now. And I think he probably would have been a straight arrow as far as that goes. But then again, in wartime, our GIs, they were living in hell. I don't know if those moral or moralistic prohibitions really came to mind as much. When I think about it, my head canon, I don't think he did, in the early days, just because I think even though he was, big buff Project Rebirth Steve Rogers by then, I think inside he was still the skinny, scrawny little Steve Rogers that
Hmm.
that probably never thought girls looked at him, whether they did or not. And even after he got big and huge and buff, and I remember in the first Avenger movie when he gets flirted with by Natalie Dormer's nurse. And I think that was probably the first
Right.
time
Yeah.
that a woman, paid attention to him, and he was surprised by it. He was like, now I realize why. And I think maybe even that the fact that, if a woman was attracted to him as Captain America or as the big buff Steve Rogers, he might have that complex where he'd say, "Oh, she only likes me, now because I'm big and handsome," and she wouldn't have liked skinny, scrawny, you know, artist Steve Rogers. And so I mean, it's an interesting thought. I guess, like I said, in my mind, I don't know if he would have. I don't know if he would have taken the time. I don't know if he would have said, "Oh, I could talk to that woman that's smiling at me in the canteen, but I should go look over battle plans for tomorrow's mission."
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
and
that's a
then
good point.
in the '60s, I always got a kick out of how in the Tales of Suspense, somewhere in the '80s when he in the issue in the '80s when he meets Sharon Carter, and then I think before even knowing each other's names, he proposes to her or something like
Yeah.
that. It's been a while since I dealt with those, but you've got to wonder where any relations came into the picture there, or if that was why he was in such a hurry to marry her.
Yeah. It's almost like you could go through each writer and be like, okay, during Englehart's run, okay, maybe not. He was more mission centric, right? De Mateus's run with Bernie
Bernie
Rosenthal.
Rosenthal.
You're like,
Yeah, definitely.
he did have more of a life, a social life
Yeah,
in De
yeah.
Mateus's run, right?
And
You
it
look at
seemed like a very normal adult relationship too.
Mhm.
right. And then
Yeah.
you look at Grunwald's run, he was more of a straight arrow kind of guy. Not sure, but Diamondback, okay, maybe. But then you get to like volume 4, right? And it's Robert Kirkman's writing at the very end, this Avengers Disassembled, and he ends the series with telling Diamondback, "Hey, how about we go get a room?" Right? I mean, I think it really depends on the writer.
And then Brubaker he was practically living with Sharon Carter. I mean, there was
Right.
those issues during Civil War where they're basically getting out of bed and getting dressed and arguing about registration.
Yeah.
Don't forget Connie Ferrari either.
How can you?
During what
Yeah.
Dan Jurgens run, right?
Yes. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, I liked her.
Yeah, she gets some votes on our Facebook group when we do the who was your favorite. I think it all has to do with when you started reading
Oh
Cap.
yeah,
Yeah, right.
definitely,
Yeah, like
definitely.
I'm a Bernie guy, because I started reading during Dan Mateus run. Although I will admit, Sharon Carter probably is the love of his life.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like with Batman. Catwoman is the love of his life, but I still like him with Talia al Ghul.
Ah,
Mhm.
So
and that's the funny thing. We did talk about that last. You were always a DC fan until you became an adult, and
yeah,
then you
yeah,
that's when you came to the right side.
right.
Yeah. So let's talk real quick about what you got coming up, because I know the last time you were here, you talked about how you would someday love to take the same steps that you did with Captain America for a Fantastic Four book. Now we've got a date,
We
February of
do,
2025.
and I have a due date.
Do you? All right, let's
Yep,
hear it. When's the date?
yep. Oh, it's just the end of 2024.
Okay.
My publisher, Occam Publishing, for those books is it'll be in the same series with a Philosopher Reads Civil War and a Philosopher Reads Thor. It'll be a Philosopher Reads Fantastic Four. And this book has actually been under contract for a while, but it's always been sort of on the back burner because while we knew there was going to be a movie, I mean, they mentioned that at Comic-Con in 2019, I think. They just flashed the 4 on the screen in Hall H during the big Marvel, the MCU presentation. So I think as soon as they did that, the publisher and I, agreed to do that book. But it wasn't until the date was announced, at this year's Comic-Con, right? Or maybe it was the Disney Expo,
Mm-hmm.
that we said, okay, now, we've got to count a few months back from the movie date and decide when the book's going to be due. And now the book's a real thing. And so, yeah, I'm going to be doing a full length treatment of the Fantastic Four like I did for Captain America.
That will be exciting. I
Yeah.
know that's going to be a big love of yours because you've been a big Fantastic Four fan for a while. And I would love to hear your thoughts on Doctor Doom and his his ethics, his morals.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it'll definitely be a big focus of the book. I mean, it'll be the book will focus on 5 people, so it'll be the 4 and Doom. I mean, they're
and Herbie
inseparable.
the robot, right? Herbie the robot.
That'll be the follow-up. That'll be the sequel. I gotta save room.
Anything else on the horizon?
In terms of superheroes, I am trying to finish. Again, this is one of the things I have to do before I can really dedicate myself to the Captain America second edition. Since they announced the return of Daredevil. Daredevil was actually the first Marvel character I got into. Again, because of Ed Brubaker. So I followed him over. I loved his book Gotham Central with Michael Lark at DC, and so when they both moved over and started doing Daredevil, I decided to start reading these weird Marvel comics, and the rest is history. But I'm working actually right now, or in the morning at least, on a short. The Thor book was a short book. We call it novella length. I'm working on a short book, hopefully the first of 3, about Daredevil, focusing on the early years up through Frank Miller's run.
Oh,
so up through Born Again, which of course is the subtitle of the upcoming Daredevil series on Disney Plus. So I don't know how much they're going to stick to the story, but I want to show in the book how the early characterization of Matt Murdock and Daredevil developed, because it's fairly accepted in Daredevil circles that Frank Miller established who Matt Murdock and Daredevil is, and ever since then everyone's been writing Frank Miller's Daredevil. And actually, the way I read it, Frank Miller didn't change him so much as he settled him, he solidified him. He took all these kind of characterizations that were kind of in the air in the early comics, and he kind of finalized what Daredevil was going to look like. So it's not like you have the first 180 issues and then you have Frank Miller as a completely different thing. Frank Miller just kind of nailed down who the character was based on all this early material. So I think it's much more of a development than it's usually described as. And so that's what I'm going to be exploring, all these basic elements of Matt Murdock that were really there from the beginning, but that Frank Miller put together in its final accepted form.
Well, you just got me excited. I don't know if you know this about me. My second favorite character is Daredevil.
Oh, great.
So I may just have to pick up one of these things that has words and no pictures and check that out. And speaking of checking out, I highly suggest everybody go to it's professormdwhite.com, but it's professor PROF MD White.com. So you can check out all of his works on there. Plus, he has links to his blogs and some other things in his social accounts. I follow him on Twitter. I get pictures of his of animals and scenery all the time. He likes to tweet those. So anyway, check that out. That website I highly recommend, and check out his other books too, because not only a professor of philosophy, but he's one heck of a writer as well. He digs in deep to a lot of things. So
I appreciate that.
Absolutely. It's been fun wrapping cap with you, Professor White. Thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, it's been a great time. Thank you for having me again.
Hopefully it will be another year and a half before we have you back. But we would certainly love to have you again.
Sure.
Take care, Mark.
Bye, guys.
All right, Bob. So, yeah, you know what? It was great having Mark White on the show. I remember when we first talked to him in episode 30, we had a blast. We had a great time. And he was like, yeah, I totally want to come back. And then here it is a year and a half later. It took a while, but you know what? You put me on the spot, Bob, when you were
Yeah.
introducing him. You're like, have we had any guests return? And we did, right? Because we had Jason Olson.
We did. You're right. Just recently. Yeah.
Yeah, we had
Yeah.
Jason Olson, another
That's right.
author,
Another
another
author.
author of
Another professor.
yeah, exactly. And so only the academics want to come back to us. So we must be too highbrow, Bob.
That must be it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's it.
Although I will say we are getting to the end of the first arc of Captain America, Sentinel of Liberty. We did say we'd have Jackson and Colin back on the show at the end of the first arc. So I'll have to reach out to them and see if we can get them back on the show.
I would love that. I missed them last time.
Yeah. Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You in 100 and some episodes, you only missed 2.
Yeah.
And they were both interviews.
They're both good ones too. Yeah.
Well, it could have been better if you were there.
Well, still worth listening to without me, folks.
Yeah, that's true. All right, Bob. So what are we going to cover next? What should we get to? Oh yeah, that's right. If you come back next episode 109, we're actually going to get into the book that Professor White mentioned while here on the show. It is Captain America 401, came out in June of 1992. So we are kind of continuing our streak, right? So episode 105 was the 60s, 106 was the 70s, 107 the 80s. So now we're back to the 90s. And what is it about 401? If you recall, when we were talking with Professor White, this was the aftermath of the Galactic Storm crossover with the Avengers, where in Cap's mind, the Avengers kind of crossed the line. And so this is a very retrospective issue where Cap kind of goes through, and he questions things, his place on the team. And it's a great issue by Mark Grunwald that we'll cover.
Yeah, it is. I mean, Mark talked about this, right? I mean, Cap is a very self-reflective, self-critical individual. And you could argue, and some have, that perhaps he's too self-reflective and too self-critical, right? Because you can't cross that line where it becomes not productive anymore as a learning experience. So I'm sure we'll talk about this when we review that issue.
Yep. So come back for episode 109, where we get to Captain America 401. All right, Bob. Confucius say, man who have last laugh, not get joke.
Oh my gosh. You have so many hidden talents, my friend.
I know. Anyway, I know, Bob, you always get the joke, which is why I love having you on the show. It's always been fun rapping Cap with you and waxing poetic and philosophically with you, Bob. It's always a blast.
That's it. Wax on, wax off, my friend.
Oh my God. I got to tell you a quick story. All right. So, where I work, I work in a Fortune 100 company. It's very PC, very it's a large company, so you have to kind of watch what you do, right? And it's great. I love working at this company, don't get me wrong. However, sometimes my sense of humor maybe comes out, and I'm standing in the kitchen with someone, and this lady, and we're talking, and she's talking about and we're roughly the same age, and she's talking about Karate Kid. And you remember when we were kids and when Karate Kid came out and we would stand in front of the mirror in that crane pose, with our arms out and our knee up and everything. We'd kind of like, do that. And I'm like, I don't know. Back when I was a teenager and I was in my bedroom, I was too busy waxing on, waxing off. And I swear, I thought like HR was gonna like just come out.
Yes, that's a very rarefied sense of humor that probably a lot of folks, didn't pick up on.
But you get me, Bob. You
Oh
get
yeah,
me.
I get you. Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, he's Bob Lucius. I'm Rick Rabanus, and you have been listening to another episode of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast. All right. This one is not for the air, but this one's just for you.
All right.
Because I figure if anybody appreciated it, it'd be you. Confucius say, sex is like the army. The closer you are to discharge, the better you feel.
My wife's gonna love that one.
I thought you'd like that one.
Yeah, she'll love that one too. She was in the Navy, so. That's great.
Here's a good one. Confucius say, it take many nail to build crib, one screw to fill it.
Oh, these are awesome.